to let people know that I I come at this slightly differently from some of the other researchers who also work on moral injury. So what you're going to hear is the perspective that I bring, and I'll tell you in a minute why my perspective is somewhat unique. So I describe moral injury as intolerable moral suffering that arises out of deep and distressing exposure to violence, the violence of militarism, militarization, and war. Moral injury is not a sign that something is wrong with an individual. It is not a mental illness or disorder, although sometimes it can lead to symptoms which do require mental health care. It is, in fact, a sign of something that is really right with human beings, that we have a conscience, a burning spark of conscience. So I follow other researchers who do not think of moral injury as a kind of pathology, but as something that indicates that there is this unique, important, wonderful moral core at the center of each of our lives. And when that is assaulted, when that is injured, when that is devastated, that creates a sense of injury that can be life-threatening. So just for a second, let's talk about moral pain, because I described moral injury as intolerable moral pain. Well, what is moral pain? I want to think about it in terms of three different types of moral pain. First of all, I want to say moral pain is normal. To be human is to experience moral pain. We have we have experiences of bad conscience when we make choices that we believe are not the right choice, when we encounter situations where we find it impossible to make good choices. Everyone experiences moral pain, and we should. We need to experience moral pain. That helps us to make better choices the next time around. It helps us to reflect on the choices that we are making. So moral pain in and of itself is not something that is bad, right? Moral pain has to do with experiencing a widespread and deep pain and suffering of the world through, in the case of military moral injuries, for instance, through the realities of militarization, war, and its devastation. But it's when it gets to the stage of being intolerable that takes place where we find ourselves unable to meaningfully intervene, where we find ourselves powerless in the face of this deep and abiding pain and suffering that we're experiencing. So that's the intolerable suffering
Hmm.
that I really want to emphasize at the heart of military moral injury. And moral injury is about really challenging and painful moral feelings. And let me just list some of them for you and for your listeners.
Please.
Shame is probably the one at the very top of the list that people experience. And shame is one of the most difficult moral feelings to deal with because to feel shame is to feel that I am bad. I am a bad person. That's what shame communicates to a person. So it's extremely difficult to deal with. But also guilt. Guilt is not quite as damaging as shame because guilt is, as opposed to I am bad, it is I did something wrong. I did a wrong thing. I did a bad thing.
Mm.
In addition to those feelings, betrayal. Betrayal is way up there in terms of the feelings, the moral feelings that people express who are living with moral injury. Anxiety, anomie. Anomie means essentially feeling like life has lost any sense of purpose or joy or meaning. Withdrawal, suicidal ideation, and finally, self-sabotaging or even vicious behaviors. Okay, So those are some of the really challenging feelings that go along with military moral injury. And military moral injury also has been described as the experience of various kinds of breakdown in relationships. First, the breakdown that one has with oneself. I betrayed myself. I betrayed my moral core. I betrayed my deepest moral center, right?
Hmm.
But also feeling betrayed by others, especially people who may be in a position of power over you or institutions, right? So a breakdown in that relationship, such that one no longer trusts those others who were in that position of power. And then lastly, it's also been described as a breakdown with one's divine power. God is a moral agent perpetrating or failing to prevent the terrible type of moral suffering that one is experiencing. So that relationship also can break down. Okay, let me make one more point, and this is where I get to the perspective that I bring to moral injury research. I really emphasize the social context that enables military moral injury and makes it possible. And I want to just read a little quote from my book that you named already that helps you to see what I'm getting at with
Hmm.
this emphasis on the social context. So here's the quote. Moral injury cannot be limited to the injury of one person, even though it's something that is very personally and intimately experienced. Investigating, thinking about, or witnessing military moral injury means running headlong into a complex dynamic of violence
Yeah,
with tentacles that reach deeply into social structures and cultural assumptions and practices. This is what distinguishes my research from some others. Because while many researchers have stressed that moral and spiritual injury are the result of wartime experiences, often they don't follow that all the way down to its foundation, our assumptions regarding the necessity and morality of war itself. I do in my research, and that is what characterizes it. I see moral injury as a flashpoint that illustrates the destructiveness of the world we human beings have made, this world of war and war culture. And in that sense, what I'm suggesting is that moral injury perhaps could be a starting point, a flashpoint for all of us to better understand what war actually is and what
right.
it really does to human beings and to societies.